Everyone, welcome back to another hardware news recap for the week. For this one, we have a pretty big show this time. First of all, Cyberpunk 2077 delayed, more on that in a minute. The rumors about AMD's big Navi GPUs have been largely wrong, or misleading in the very least. We'll talk about that as well. The EU doesn't like proprietary phone chargers, and neither do reasonable people. And also Microsoft hoping to go into the negatives on its carbon emissions over the next couple decades. And then finally, some NVIDIA RTX news. Before that, this video is brought to you by the Drop and Hi-Fi Man HE4XX planar magnetic headphones. The HE4XX headphones focus on high-quality audio listening experiences with comfortable foam cushions for the ear cups. Comfort is also ensured with a leather-covered spring steel headband, allowing flexibility and durability against bends. These headphones are capable of delivering big sound for audiophiles while being positioned competitively in price. Learn more at the link in the description below. Before we get into the hardware news, I wanted to cover a charity drive we're doing for Wildlife Rescue South Coast in Australia. The group is dedicated to rescuing and helping animals recover from the bushfires in Australia, and I've been researching these for a couple of weeks now, but this is the one we've decided on. I'll talk about more on why we chose them in a minute. So some of the things we're doing for this, we're going to be auctioning off this mod mat, which has a lot of signatures from some notables in the industry. It's one of our first mod mats we made. I'll talk about more of who's signed this in a moment, but one of them is Der Bauer from before the bromance started. So it's before he dotted everything with hearts when he autographed things that I also autographed. We've got that going on. We're also going to be giving $1,500 just directly to the charity. Sometimes when we do these things, the group we're working with has a way to do a donation match. This one doesn't. There's no way I can track who from our audience has given money to them versus who hasn't. So I'd love to do a match, but I'm just going to give $1,500, and then hopefully you all can kind of meet me halfway there and give some money. So we'll link them below. We'll also link the eBay listing for this mat below, and I'm going to talk about this more in a minute. And then separately from all of that, we're also going to be giving 10% of our gross revenue from the GN store to Wildlife Rescue South Coast in Australia, starting January 19th, ending February 19th. My friend who handles the distribution, the shipping, also offered to donate for every item he ships for us for the month. So if you wanted to buy something from us anyway, now's a great time because part of your purchase will go towards funding the recovery group. If you'd rather just give all the money straight to charity and bypass us, we're 100% okay with that. We have a link below where you can do that. This is more about if you wanted to buy stuff from us anyway, now is the time to do it. So as for the store, we just restocked the ceramic mugs for this. We have a lot of large and medium mod mats back in stock and shipping now. We've added our brand new Disappointing GPU shirt to store.gamersnexus.net. It's got the same front as the Disappointment PC 2019 shirt, but a different back since it's not 2019 anymore. If you missed the Disappointment PC shirt and you wanted that front design anyway, this is a great way to grab that similar design and give a portion of the purchase to charity. And if you end up going to buy a mod mat and they're on back order by the time you try to buy it, then as long as it's ordered within the period, we're still going to give 10% of the gross revenue from that to the charity. So even if it doesn't ship right away, although everything's in stock right now, if it's on back order, we'll still go through with that donation. So anyway, on the charity, I spent the last 2 or 3 weeks researching different organizations. It's actually part of the reason we slowed down for videos this week. I got really obsessed with researching all of them and really wanted to help out any way I could with wildlife recovery specifically. So this was the group we ended up deciding on. And the Wildlife Rescue South Coast has been operating since the 1980s. So they haven't just popped up from the bushfires. They know what they're doing. They have the experience necessary to help the animals properly. And I also like them because they work with another group that I liked, which is called Wild 2 Free, which just had its whole hundreds of acres of sanctuary burned down in Australia. And that's a sanctuary that's rebuilding right now. Both groups are working together to recover and also to establish wildlife feeding areas and watering areas. So that's one of the biggest problems right now is even for the animals that survive without any injuries in the areas affected by the bushfires, they're left with no more vegetation to eat. So that's a huge problem, and these groups help with leaving out food or water to help those. And then they also bring the ones back that have been injured to try and recover heal their wounds and get them back out there. So the fact that these groups work on rehabilitating animals and on helping ones left in the wild is what made me want to support them. I also noticed that they had less support than some of the much larger organizations. There's less operating overhead with these smaller charities, and nearly all the money spent on going to a cause. They're primarily volunteer-driven, not employee-driven, and that's why I wanted to support them. One of the biggest challenges right now with something like this, where there's hundreds of millions of dollars getting donated, is that there's almost too much money coming into too few places, and so it's not possible to spend it all now, which isn't to say anything bad about the companies getting or the organizations getting the money. It's just that there's so much coming in, it's physically impossible. So I'm trying to spread it out a little more to some of the smaller groups that could definitely use it in recovering their sanctuaries. So anyway, for the mod mat, we're donating 100% of the proceeds from this auction to the charity. And as for the signatures on it, let's see. So this has a bit of a story to it. This was from the first production run of mod mats, and there's a few ways you can tell that. So the first production run, 50% of them had a slight gray color to the top of it, and 50% of them were black. This is one of the 50% of the black ones. And that's accompanied by another change, which is the snap, the anti-static snap on the original production runs, the first couple runs or so, did not have a screw in it, and the new ones do. So this actually just snapped straight into the mat, whereas the newer ones have a screw you can remove if you wanted to get the snap out of there. So that's how you can tell it's from the original run. And it's a first-gen mod mat, and I had it autographed by some of our friends when I went to Computex, I think the first time I ever went. So that would be right around when these came out. And we didn't know as many people in the industry then, so it's got fewer signatures. And then I'm gonna have my core team sign this as well. So it'll actually be the only thing that we've all signed at GN. So I'll have Patrick, Andrew, and Keegan sign this mat as well. And if you want, whoever wins the charity auction will be on eBay. Whoever wins that auction will, if you want us to, we'll personalize it and put a note on there. And if not, that's fine too. All right, so first generation mod mat. It's got some cool signatures on it. It was used briefly, actually, on the set table at my house before we moved to the office. So it's got some history to it there as well, although it's not as heavily used as some of the others. And we'll link it in the description below. If you want to buy one, but you can't afford the auction, then obviously you can go to store.gamersnexus.net if you're planning on buying one anyway. And for the next month, we're going to be donating 10% of those proceeds to the charity as well. Or you can just give it straight to them. That's 100% fine with me. If you want to give all the money to the charity, absolutely do it. So anyway, that's it for this one. I'm also going to try and do a stream in the next week or so, and we'll set that up with the charity as well, do like a super chats for them or something like that. So keep an eye out for that. I'm also trying to get some stuff in from KINGPIN. We'll see what he can give that we can auction off as well later on. So keep an eye out for all that. Let's get into the news for this week. First news item for the show, Cyberpunk 2077 delayed. This is more game news, but it relates to hardware because so much of the industry is building towards the launch of this game. Cyberpunk 2077, as you've all heard by now, has been delayed past its original April launch date and instead to a September 17th, 2020 launch date. The game has been in development for what feels like forever at this point, and CDPR released a statement that said the following, quote, "We are currently at a stage where the game is complete and playable, but there's still work to be done. Night City is massive, full of stories, content, and places to visit, but due to the sheer scale and complexity of it all, we need more time to finish playtesting, fixing, and polishing. We want Cyberpunk 2077 to be our crowning achievement for this generation, and postponing launch will give us the precious months we need to make the game perfect." Similar to when AMD delayed its 3950X, there were, of course, a lot of comments online about how irate they are about a delay of a video game. But just as a reminder, this is what we all complain about all the time. When media and consumers complain about games or hardware products being incomplete, bad, and not good at launch, it's because the companies didn't delay when they should have. So hopefully, this is a sign of something good. Hopefully CDPR realized that it just needed to delay launch so it didn't release to a cacophony of issues from the community all being voiced at once. Either way though, now that the company has said the game's complete and it only needs polishing, and it's also spending about almost a year doing that, fixing and polishing act that they're doing, there's gonna be a lot more pressure to make sure that it's not buggy, and a lot more scrutiny from the community once it does launch, knowing that they've had most of a year to clean it up. So without knowing further details, hopefully this is the right decision, because it was the right decision when AMD did it with the 3950X, and companies really do need to just slow down for a second and make sure their stuff isn't complete garbage when it launches. So this is maybe a move in the right direction. Xbox Series X SSDs, this one's a bit of a rumor, but not too much, could be based on a Phison controller. So A recent report from Digitimes claims that Phison has reportedly, quote, broken into the supply chain of Microsoft's Xbox, which would be for its storage solution. This goes on to suggest that Microsoft's next console will have SSDs based on Phison's controllers. We already know that they're supposed to have SSDs. Sony made this whole big deal about SSDs and how it's this new revolutionary way of gaming that no one's ever experienced before, except for on PCs for about a decade now. Anyway, we could further speculate that the controllers would support PCIe Gen 4, given that it's a Phison accompaniment. Phison was the first to market with a client-oriented PCIe Gen 4 SSD controller, taking the form of the PS5016-E16. We also know Phison is preparing for a higher-end PS5018-E18 that is supposedly capable of 7 GB per second throughput, with a large B there. Then there's the more mainstream PS5019-E19T that's supposed to offer around 4 GB per second throughput. Both controllers are due sometime in 2020, and the NVMe SSD that comes with the Xbox Series X, or whatever it's called, could end up supporting a controller modeled after one of them, if we were guessing. Or it could be based on some variant of the Phison E16 controller, which is already proven popular. Given that Phison was first to market with PCIe Gen 4 for SSDs and already has had at least one controller on the market for some time now, it does put the company in an advantageous position to supply next-gen consoles. We've heard a lot of numbers about AMD's B550 chipset and when it's supposed to happen. One of those we reported during CES in some of our MSI booth coverage, but it's still a moving target. Part of that is because the fabricator of the silicon for the chipsets it changes based on the generation a bit. So another report by Digitimes has pegged AMD's next 600 series chipsets as landing by the end of 2020. One of the numbers we heard for B550, we've heard first quarter, but more recently we've also hit third quarter. So who knows when it's going to come out at this point. But by the time AMD launches B550, it might be eating its own chipset with the 600 series. Either way, according to Digitimes sources, ASMedia has already secured contracts to build AMD's 600 series of chipsets, and that should accompany Ryzen 4000. Ryzen 4000 is rumored for release at some point eventually. As for timelines, the current rumor is second half of the year, likely after Computex. So the two rumors align to an extent. It's just they're both rumors. So ASMedia is also working on a USB 4 chip. It plans to bring this to market this year. It'll be interesting to see what effect, if any, that has on AMD's next AM4 chipset. AMD's X670 heralded the arrival of PCIe Gen 4 for consumers, and AMD could very well offer the first motherboard supporting the new USB standard. In an online landscape that's becoming increasingly more concerned with privacy, with things like home spying devices, i.e. Alexa, and Google, our overlords, and also Microsoft in this story later, in the news show later, it should be apparent that companies like Verizon would want a way to monetize the privacy paranoia while also cashing in on it on the other side of that. Verizon's newest venture seemingly positions the company, the same one, by the way, that violates net neutrality and has been caught red-handed selling the data of its wireless customers, as your next privacy provider. Verizon has also staunchly opposed legislation that aims at strengthening consumer privacy online in the past and affording more privacy to customers, such as obtaining opt-in consent from customers before ravaging their data for monetary purposes. But hey, giant telecom conglomerates can always change. Not necessarily for the better, but they can change. After all, privacy is nothing if not profitable. Look at NordVPN. The new search engine by Verizon called OneSearch is being positioned as an obvious alternative to Google. Verizon claims that your search queries will be encrypted and search terms will not be stored. Verizon also says that it will not use cookies with OneSearch, nor will it track or profile you. Verizon's OneSearch results are powered by Bing and will serve, quote, contextual ads, that is, ads based on the search keywords rather than targeting ads based on a user profile or anything else that's identifiable. At least that's what Verizon says. We'll take this opportunity to remind you that DuckDuckGo exists. But also, OneSearch, really? Got to work on the naming for that. So it's interesting. It's interesting especially because the recent New York Times story that it was from late December went into detail about how individual points of data can all be linked together. So when you're looking at tracked cell phone data, for example, even though it's anonymized, any individual point in the data set can be associated with its other points. So you can see where one individual has been throughout the entirety of their phone's life. Even though it doesn't have a name for that person, as New York Times pointed out, you can find famous or well-known individuals like, say, politicians or extremely wealthy celebrities who have enough money to sit in a mansion where obviously no one else will be. You can find them in their place of residence or work and then figure out where their dot also goes, for example, to sleazy places that you might not want known. Anyway, Verizon, good timing to get in on this, especially since it's probably included in that New York Times story. Also, that's a really interesting story you should all read about if you want to know about how privacy is futile. Next one, the EU doesn't like proprietary phone chargers. This is one of the good stories. If you've noticed that a lot of electronic devices these days have stopped shipping with chargers, or at least the part that plugs into the outlet, they might still include the cable. That's overall a good thing. Most devices trust that by now. You probably have at least one charger, if not a drawer full of chargers with a swappable cable that you can plug into any device you want. And so it reduces some of the cost of the product, helping consumers there, and also some of the waste, helping everybody. The European Parliament recently published that the device chargers alone that accompany devices purchased account for 51,000 metric tons of e-waste annually. And the European Union believes that charging devices or chargers for devices should be standardized going forward. So it helped reduce waste. It's really a shame that there's not some sort of universal standard for charging, almost like a universal bus of some kind. UBS, universal bus of some kind. Some kind of UBS charger that we could use to charge all of our devices with just one end for the cable that can be plugged into almost anything. Well, anyway, it's a shame that that doesn't exist. But Apple is currently the primary company that's threatened by the EU's desire to change this and enforce a single charging standard on mobile devices. Apple surely will think of this as an opportunity to create a new standard, because when there's a lot of standards, you need a new one to unify all the standards. Anyway, it likes to think itself a sophisticrat, of course, and so we suspect that Apple will probably find a way to comply with the potentially new legislation by skirting the rules. Our guess would be that Apple might switch to something like fully inductive charging, because then, we don't need a plug-in charger, so we can bypass the rules. Apple hates things that are efficient or not wasteful or not a waste of money for the consumer, and so they'll probably ship inductive charging stations, blast the batteries as much as possible with as much current as possible to wear them out as quickly as possible, and alternatively move everything to USB Type-C. That would be great too. Next one, Microsoft removing past carbon emissions in the same tune as the previous story. Microsoft posted a massive blog update that's actually a really interesting read, but it plans to become carbon negative in just 10 years, not stopping at being carbon neutral. The company hopes that it can remove its historic carbon emissions as well, dating back to the 1970s when it was founded, and formerly founded by Gates, of course, who presently has investments in a lot of different renewable energy companies and also in carbon capture companies. The Microsoft announcement here should kind of make sense because there's a bit of a business angle too, where they see an opportunity in carbon capture and want to dump a lot of money into it to hopefully lead the charge there. Now, the upside is that it does hopefully good things as well. The quote from Microsoft was as follows: "The world's climate experts agree that the world must take urgent action to bring down emissions. Ultimately, Microsoft says we must reach net zero emissions, meaning that humanity must remove as much carbon as it emits each year. While the world will need to reach net zero, those of us who can afford to move faster and go further should do so. That's why today, Microsoft is announcing an ambitious goal and a new plan to reduce and ultimately remove Microsoft's carbon footprint." Now, this is a good thing because Microsoft's going to need more and more overhead for additional power to store all of your data and everything that you do in Windows, which is malware. But Microsoft published exhaustive detail on the subject, not to take away from something actually good being done for once. It noted that it's taking a scientific approach to the problem, and Microsoft already levies internal carbon taxes against its own divisions and engineering groups internally. This helps force engineering groups to find solutions to things like power consumption, power management, which again benefit the user of the end product, so that's a byproduct that's useful. And Further, Microsoft wants to invest $1 billion in what it's calling a climate innovation fund that it, I guess, has founded, which aims to accelerate carbon capture technology to help bring emissions negative. Of course, we already have technology to capture carbon. It's been evolved over billions of years, and it's green and brown. But at this point, the problem probably requires a multi-pronged approach. Not quite enough anymore, and we need to plant the landmass of America anyway. So, also shout out to Eden Reforestation Projects when we worked with them, if anyone wants to do some more good. Microsoft will also be publishing new environmental sustainability reports to provide transparency on its emissions. It indicated interest in, quote, supporting public policy towards acceleration of carbon reduction. This is actually really interesting because Microsoft is a large entity, and when companies like Apple and Microsoft speak up, typically the government listens. This will likely involve lobbying, but you got to play the game to win the game, I guess. Microsoft published additional studies on data and energy consumption, CO2 emissions, and mapped GDP against global temperature increases. It's all really interesting if you are data minded and just like looking at charts and data. We'd encourage checking it out. It'll be linked in our show notes below. And then that Microsoft link goes off to other studies if you want even more data. So anyway, this is a matter where every single person has to take initiative, not just the multinationals and the governments. Our viewers did that by working with us to plant 90,000 trees through Eden Reforestation Projects in November and December of last year. And we hope at GN to remain active in working with the community on some other cool projects coming up in the next few months. So one of them for you to keep an eye out on is going to be something where we're working with an electronics recycler to refurbish systems so that they can get reused by, there's a lot of systems out there that get thrown away that are perfectly good. They just need a bit of care to be up and running again. So we're working on some stuff like that with some nonprofits that should be really fun content, especially because it's centered around building computers and getting old systems that are dead back into service. And then we also have some partnerships for other e-waste and tree planting type initiatives. So keep an eye out on all that. I guess I'll note too that we reduced our electricity consumption by about 16.8 kilowatt hours or so per day just in the last couple months by efficiently optimizing how our systems are used here and power management plans, stuff like that. Anyway, next one. Rumor mills misreporting AMD's big Navi stories. So the rumor mills grabbed a hold of a recent name filing with the Eurasian Economic Commission, or the EEC, which indicated AMD products like a 5800 XT, a 5950, and a 5950 XT. These purveyors of rumors also indicated that the company AFOX, or AFOX, made these filings. So a few things. First of all, AFOX, or however you say their name, doesn't presently make any current generation AMD video cards. The newest we saw was an RX 590, so that's a big jump right away. Secondly, the EEC filings are not filed by AMD. They did not make these filings. Neither did board partners, by the way. Igor's lab retrieved a statement from AFOX and indicated that one of its Russian distribution partners filed the names, not the board partner. And so those names listed in the document are basically guesses. Basically, these were created in anticipation of something that might exist at some point, and not actually by a company that has the product in hand, and certainly not by AMD, which is the only one that really knows the names at this point. Now, given AMD's naming conventions, it's not impossible that a 5800 XT might exist, or even a 5900, or whatever these names were, but we'd be guessing too, and so were the people who filed the reports with the EEC. As a reminder, before Navi launched, there were similar reports filed where everybody in the rumor mill swore that these cards would be called the 3700, as if to follow up NVIDIA and the 20 series, and some reason that was a whole big story. But they ended up being called the 5000 series of cards. So probably best to just wait and see what actually happens, because ultimately who cares about the damn name anyway, especially when we don't know if any of these devices will exist. So this is not indicative of silicon existing at 3 different price tiers above a 5700 XT. It's not even indicative of what the names will be. It's a guess. And we know that Big Navi will exist. Lisa Su, CEO of AMD, said that herself. So probably just wait a bit till we have something more credible. Anyway, this isn't us being coy either. We genuinely have no information from AMD on silicon whose numbering exceeds 5700. Last one, NVIDIA price cuts ahead of the 5600 XT launch from AMD at CES 2020. EVGA pulled out its KO card, which Just to be really clear here, KO is not an NVIDIA designation. Saw some people who thought that this is an NVIDIA thing and the partners are making it. It's an EVGA thing. It's actually an old name that EVGA used. So they brought it back. They dubbed the 2060 KO and KO Ultra cards and also planned to bring the prices down. EVGA had its 2060 KO listed at $280 originally, which was actually a really compelling and interesting price. And unfortunately, it's already increased in price again. The company promised, technically, that the 2060 KO would be under $300, and technically, $299.99 before shipping or taxes is under $300. Most people would call that $300, but it was a lot more interesting at $280. Either way, we have one, and we're gonna test it in our 5600 XT review. We have one of those as well. That's not a surprise to anyone at this point. So now it just see how it does when we publish the review. Anyway, it seems AMD has further forced NVIDIA to show its hand here, so to speak. NVIDIA preemptively cut some of the prices. It's encouraging the video card partners to do the same, and also sent out a note to press reminding everybody that the 2060 is now $300, or can be found for $300 anyway. That seems to include, by the way, the Founders Edition, which you shouldn't buy. It has the absolute worst assembly we've ever worked with in a video card. Anyway, that's it for this one. Thanks for watching. Subscribe for more. Go to store.gamersnexus.net to help us out directly, or patreon.com/gamersnexus, and we'll see you all next time.